Welcome to One Work, Five Questions. But today is a special episode of One Work, Many Questions on Dr. Holowchak's book, The Disease of Liberty. Thank you for joining us today to review your book, Dr.
Glad to be here. I'm here at the site of the Statue of Liberty. Does this show up? I
No,
never
it doesn't.
with the fake
There you
background.
go. Right there, right there.
Got the Disease of Liberty. We're gonna do that, right? Or something like that.
Oh, the disease. Maybe when you put the recording up, you can put a copy up.
I can do that, or I can put it right at the end or the book.
Okay.
The video's done.
Okay, yeah, so people can see what it looks like. So when they're looking for it, they select the right book. So before we get started, I do want to review your credentials because this is so important when learning history and reading history material, that the person has the credentials and the experience of studying history. That's so important. So Dr. Holowchak comes to us as a professor of philosophy and history who is taught at institutions such as University of Pittsburgh. I should have this memorized by now. I think I just get nervous.
You think so?
University of Michigan, Rutgers University, Camden, and Ohio University. And he has 28 published books on Thomas Jefferson. Wow. Nobody knows.
Two in the offing. The one on the Natural Bridge, they just did the cover, so that's coming out very shortly.
Wow. Okay.
Like you, they got my credentials wrong.
Oh.
They had that I had like 23 books on Jefferson. I'll fix that.
And over 225 essays on Thomas Jefferson. That's fantastic. And if you want to improve your writing skills and your vocabulary, read Dr. Holowchak's work.
Or if you want to get a migraine.
Yeah, that too. No, I'm teasing. But I do consider Dr. Holowchak to be the world's foremost authority on the mind of Thomas Jefferson. So for all of you watching, hear what Dr. Holowchak is saying on his book. Okay, so are you ready to get started with some questions I put together?
I'm ready to get started. So
okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, so my first question is, what inspired you to write the book, The Disease of Liberty?
Well, one of the questions is, for example, with numerous books on Jefferson, why write? That's an intriguing question, and that's a reasonable question. The answer is because Jefferson is a man of such great breadth and depth that you can do that. You can, there are a lot of things that when writing about Thomas Jefferson about which I'm ignorant. For example, in Jefferson's time in France, I've written on that before, but I've never gone into any detail. And at some point I'm thinking, geez, I don't know a lot about that. So I wrote a book about Jefferson's time in France. The book on Jefferson and Liberty, remember I made a quote that scared you to death. I said something that scared you to death. I said, sometimes people say one thing and it tells me everything about them.
Mm-hmm.
And you said, I got to be careful what I say. But that does happen at times. And Jeff, stop. He's got his dog buddy outside. He wants to go chase him away. Jefferson writes this. I was reading his correspondence to John Wales Epps. And this was a letter on November 6, 1813. And Jefferson writes about the American Revolution. He calls it a holy war. Now, that metaphor sort of hit me. He says, if ever there was a holy war, it was that which saved our liberties and gave us independence. And that struck me. What is a holy war?
Yeah.
It's a war that's holy. Why is it holy? Because the people who are fighting it think God is on your side.
Right.
So what I did immediately upon reading this, because it happens sometimes when Jefferson writes a letter, he will copy the same letter exactly and send it to somebody else, and he'll write something similar. So He's got this notion of the revolution as a holy war.
Right.
So I looked throughout all of his writings on founders online and typed in, under Thomas Jefferson, quotes, Holy War. This is the only time he ever calls the revolution, only time, which is very interesting. So why does it come to mind on November 6, 1813? I looked at all of his letters in November 6, 1813. He's thinking about it. Is he talking about in any of the other letters about the revolution and describe it as a holy war? No. So for some awkward reason, an inexplicable reason, he calls the revolution a holy war to John Wales Epps, right? And so it really was the inspiration for this book. And I started thinking about it's a holy war. That meant that the revolution was very, very dear to Thomas Jefferson. And I had written another book, Jefferson's Political Philosophy and the Metaphysics of Utopia, published by Brill. And, I covered many of the same things I covered in this book. This book focuses on Jefferson's views of liberty and his version of historiography. How should history be written? What is history to Thomas Jefferson? Why is it important? So in that sense, I wanted to write this book about Jefferson's philosophical book on Jefferson and liberty. And I wanted it to be, like I said, a philosophical book. And I wanted really to examine very, very carefully what he meant by liberty. And my fellow philosopher and Dr. Donald Livingston paid me the very high compliment by saying, some sense, Mark, a lot of people will devote a page to Jefferson and liberty because you write a book on it. That was a very high compliment because it came from a very highly intelligent person and a person whose opinion I really respect. So that was the motivation. I mean, there's several different types of motivations I give for a book. That's why.
What did Jefferson then? I know this is not a prepared question. I don't know if I should throw this out there, but
you don't need prepared questions.
What was his final definition of liberty?
I flesh out, and I do this in my earlier book, The Metaphysics of Utopia, 4 different conceptions of liberty. There's the liberty where you're free to do what you want to do, positive liberty, where you can do whatever you want to do. Negative liberty is you're free from governmental, and then I have 2 different conceptions of moral liberty. One under not moral liberty, of liberty to choose. One is just the liberty to choose your own things, and one of these is moral liberty. Moral liberty being the ability to make choices on actions that have moral consequences. Now, there's a Greek word, adiaphora, which means things that, let me put it simply, things that have no moral implications. Like, imagine if I'm counting the freckles on my hand, right? Someone says, well, is that a moral action? Is that a virtuous action or vicious action? Probably the best answer would be that it's neither. So it's adiaphoros, right? So I want to be able to talk about humans choosing, and I want to talk about 2 different types of choices, one of which involves actions that are neither virtuous or vicious, the other of which involves actions that are virtuous and vicious. Now, personally speaking, I probably don't think that there are any actions that are adiaphoros, right? Like counting the freckles. You might say, well, that's not moral or it's not vicious. But in some sense, right, if I could be engaged in more worthwhile pursuits and I'm just killing the time, it is a vicious activity in some sense. You get what I'm talking about? I mean, boondoggling or just killing time. You're doing nothing.
Okay.
Well, a Stoic philosopher might say, well, everything you do is either virtuous or vicious. And if you're just killing time, you're behaving viciously because you could be doing something worthwhile.
Right.
Doing something, right? So, I talk about those 4. In Jefferson's, the lion's share of the time, Thomas Jefferson wants to talk about liberty, not in the sense of being able to decide your own course of action, but liberty being free from governmental encroachment.
Okay,
Once you have that, then you can do what you want to do.
okay,
Right.
right,
So you ask yourself, what do you want to do?
okay. Now it makes sense. So that leads me into my second question. I think I understand now.
I'm glad
Because
you did, because I'm confused.
I have been baffled, I have to say. So that's why I have the second question. Can you explain why
Bumfuzzled, baffled,
puzzled? Yeah. Why you chose the title of the book? Because disease is not a favorable word. And placing that in the title as it pertains to liberty was confusing to me. What you just said helps me to understand a little bit, but I was hoping you could expand on that.
No, I can't.
Oh, okay.
I'm
Okay,
just
show's
teasing.
over. Goodbye.
Well, in some sense, we look at disease as being a negative word. And
Well, nobody wants one.
let me, the little loudmouth dog is chasing this guy across the street. Guy kicked him. Poor dog.
I can't think of a disease I want.
Diseases, yeah, we look at it as a bad. And obviously, but there's a sense in which, from a medical perspective, disease is neither good nor bad. It's just descriptive of certain state of affairs in an organism. An organism is not in a healthy state. You understand? So it's not good or bad. As a doctor, I just look at disease as a category, way of categorizing something, an unhealthy human state. And I think at Jefferson's day, they used disease in that way. And Jefferson uses disease, meaning, I think he's using it because it's ambiguous, because it can mean more than one thing.
Okay.
It can cleanly mean more than one thing. We tend to look at it as a bad thing, and that's what you're getting. And that's what I wanted in the title. So why did I pick the title? I want people to say disease. Oh, that's bad.
Liberty is not a disease.
It is, because it is what property do diseases have? When one with the disease is around another person who doesn't have it, what could happen?
Catch it. It's
Yes, contagion.
Right.
Diseases are contagious. So disease has a certain contagion. And Jefferson thinks that when people start to breathe the air of liberty, there's no turning back. And I say that in the
That's
book.
a good thing, though, isn't it?
It's what that?
That's a good thing, though, isn't it?
Well, I think so. Yes, that's the whole thing. Is that Jefferson wasn't that stupid of a person. I talk in the book here. I stopped doing work on Ukraine. I'm working on a history of Ukraine. It's called Ukraine, Birth of a Nation. My first book is Birth of a Nation, from Kievan Rus to the Hetmanate. So the early part of the history of Ukraine, and then that's part one. And that's going to be about. But when in my other book on Joseph Stalin and Ukrainians, and I talk about a couple very important Ukrainian people who are working for the Russian government, Petro Grigorenko and Viktor Kravchenko. Kravchenko writes his book, I Chose Freedom, right? And Kravchenko, went to New York, saw the Statue of Liberty, and he's been hounded by an autocrat, a tyrant, a dictator, in a tyrannical government all of his life. People are over your shoulder watching everything you do. He writes this in his book: the citizens of a free country have nothing in their personal experience to make my feelings and my behavior credible. The utter tragic must seem to them merely eccentric, right? Meaning is that when you're born into a climate of freedom, you take it for granted. And I use it just like air. Do you think anything of air? I mean, do you wake up in the morning and start thinking of air? But if I put you in an environment where you're deprived of oxygen, it's the most precious thing you can imagine.
Right.
It's ubiquitous. It's all around us, so we don't think about air being wonderful and beautiful.
Right.
And freedom is like that. When you have it, you don't see it. You don't feel it. You don't understand it. And I'll read the quote from the other important Ukrainian who was part of the Soviet government. He said he went to New York City after being exiled. America is a sea of light where night is turned into day. He adds, he and his wife have traveled not just to another country, but to another planet. Right? Think about that. I mean, I've got all these protests going on at college campuses, right? And the protesters are, in some sense, are just engaging in the practice of free expression. I think a lot of them don't even know what they're doing. That's my personal experience.
So is this like that could be considered the disease of liberty?
No, the disease Jefferson thinks is a good thing. This is an extreme of liberty.
Okay.
When you're using the very thing. Imagine if, people having so much water, what you need on a daily basis, that you're abusing it and getting rid of it.
Right.
So that there's a shortage of water. Well, and that's what I think is going on, in a lot of the protests and so forth. People are exercising their privileges, but they're doing it just like what people have been doing with things like the 1619 thesis and so forth. They're using the very privileges that the country gives them to express their freedoms, their liberty, to destroy the country, to undermine the very values of the country. They're using liberty to destroy liberty. That's the overreaching, the excessive liberty.
Okay.
Right? To use freedom to destroy freedom. You're free to destroy freedom, and you are in this country, but it makes no sense. You don't. So what Jefferson would say, for God's sakes, you don't understand what you have. Right. It's like, Grigorenko said, if you come into this country from the Soviet Union, the people of America don't know what they have.
Right.
It's like saying, come and live in the USSR today, live in Russia today. You'll appreciate your freedom.
So that's what my third question was, and I think you covered it, and you may have some more to say about it, but
you don't have to enumerate your questions.
Well, I'm sorry, what?
You don't have to number your questions because
okay. Okay, so I was going to ask, why is this topic relevant today? But I think you're explaining it now.
Yeah, right? I think I don't have to answer that, so you understand that.
Yeah,
it's relevant because I'm going to write something for Abbeville for 4th of July on the Declaration, and hopefully I'll be able to give a talk here in Flint. It's not too many people open up on things like that. So why? Because it's always relevant. It's timeless.
Mm-hmm.
If Jefferson is right, one of the theses of my book, and perhaps the largest thesis, is that Jefferson treats liberty as you're having fun there. Jefferson treats liberty as a thing.
Okay.
How can liberty be a thing when most people say it's just a concept? We create a concept to cover the way people behave. It's not really a thing, right? Is health, think of health. You consider health to be a thing. Health is just a word that describes a body with certain properties, namely good blood pressure, good heart working, the lungs are working properly, something like that. Eating well, everything, good body weight, healthy appetite, so forth. But, one could argue that health is a thing, that health is a property, that at some point when you live such and such a way, you acquire the property of healthiness, and is, in a Platonic sense, an actual thing, just like the ancient virtue ethic theorists like Aristotle and Plato thought virtue really was a thing. That once I behave in such an, Aristotle would say, if I choose something because it's right, I do it habitually over time. I recognize it's right, number one. I choose it because I recognize it's right. Now, that doesn't make me virtuous because, I could be the world's worst person and donate blood at one point, and that's a nice thing to do, but then next day, I'm an asshole of it.
Oh, I know many people like that.
But you have to do it over and over again. It has to just become like breathing. That's when, the ancient Greeks and Romans, Seneca and so forth, would say you're virtuous when you just, without thinking, you're doing the right thing all the time. You're like in the virtuous zone. You live that way. You don't think twice about lying. You never
Second
lie.
nature.
It's yeah, you just do it.
Right.
You just do it after a while. So why is it relevant? Because it's always relevant. Jefferson would say liberty just is a part of the human constitution. We are constitutionally inclined towards liberty, towards acquiring that capacity to be free people. Right? Freedom is something that I can acquire by living in such a way. Now notice, let me ask you, would liberty just, look at the one definition of liberty, is just government not bother me in enabling me to live as I want to live. And that's what, what's called negative liberty today.
Negative liberty? Okay.
Negative liberty, just government stays out of my business, lets me do.
Okay.
Now, in one sense, yeah, that's the freedom you want at the social political level.
Right.
But it's not very helpful, right? Is that if government's not bothering me and I can do whatever I want to do, that's kind of good. That's good, presumably for Jefferson. Can you see any problems with that, though?
Yeah, well, for those who have no form of self-governance, yeah, they'll violate other people's boundaries constantly.
Yeah, and they might even violate their own.
Yeah.
I mean, if I don't know who I am, the Greeks, right? Know theseauton, know yourself. If I don't know who I am, I don't know how to live right. Or if I live, I use the example in this book and in the other one. Imagine I go to a candy shop and someone says, you can buy whatever you want, but they're only selling, what kind of candy is there? Hershey's chocolate bars with almond.
Yeah.
That's the only candy that's there. And someone says, you can buy whatever you want. It's really not very helpful, is it?
No.
So, I mean, Jefferson thinks that the government needs to get involved in giving you the liberty to live as you want to do by giving you options. So the government needs to make sure that you're not only free, but there's a certain infrastructure. So if you want to get into business, that there are roads and canals so that Virginia can connect with, say, Kentucky or whatever. So the government need educational facilities, and maybe the government at the state level can help with that. And then maybe there even could be a federal university. Jefferson toyed with that notion for a while. So the government needs to get involved. There are many different types of liberty for Jefferson. And it's relevant for us today, I think, because I think Jefferson's right about liberty. We all want it, but we need to understand what it is. It involves significantly, and this is what kids at the colleges don't quite get right. It involves certain responsibilities.
I was just going to say that. That's what I was thinking. Along with liberty comes responsibilities and obligations.
Yeah, and that's what, you can't do whatever you want to do. Because you have a right to protest doesn't mean you have a right to shut other people down. You have a right to take over institutions and stop other people's educations.
Right.
You have a right to insult people. So I was talking with someone the other day. Finally, someone agreed with me. I think, part of the things that have happened with the youth, with the Black Lives Matters movement, which I'm not commenting politically one way or the other, any of these, and then we get into the gay, lesbians, and pronouns, and now we're into the, anti-Israel phase.
Mm-hmm.
All this by the same generation of people. You think about that. Boom, boom, boom. I've just jumped from 3 different things. I've been on board 3 different ships.
All right.
This is a group of people that just wants to be heard and seen. And they're doing it in ways that are, I don't want to say insignificant, but potentially damaging. That's not what liberty means.
Right.
It's a very dangerous thing. And I understand young kids want to be heard. Everybody did. In the 60s, people wanted to get heard. There were people tuning in and tuning out. Some people just wanted to get away from it all, the war and everything, so they got messed up, drunk and on drugs. And They got high. There are the people really tuning in. They were so in tune with what's going on with the war. Let's get out of Vietnam and all that. And it was a great time for people to be angry. We fought for civil rights for blacks. We fought for women's rights. We fought, Walter Cronkite for the first time was talking about the war was the wrong thing to do. So we're questioning the government. Is the government really doing things? Are they doing things in the best interests? It was a very healthy time. Protest can be a very healthy thing if it's done the right way.
Yeah.
Jefferson always say that.
Yeah.
Remember his love of revolution and rebellion. His love of rebellions. We talked about that, didn't we?
Oh yeah, my favorite quote.
Tree of liberty must be nourished by the blood of tyrants.
No, not pirates, of patriots.
Tyrants.
Patriots.
Oh, well, anyways, we put tyrants in there too.
Blood of pirates and patriots.
Tyrants and patriots.
Oh, tyrants. I thought you were saying pirates.
No.
Oh.
Get it correct. I got this statue in back.
Okay. Oh, I thought you were saying pirates, and I'm like, we're
tyrants.
I'm thinking of the Barbary pirate. Okay, tyrants. Okay, I need to have my hearing checked. So, well, that
you
leads
need
us
the water. Is that lavender in the back there on your welcome? I think you need to water your lavender.
Oh yeah, I think it's dying. I've dropped it too many times. It's starting to tilt.
This is my Cossack pipe, by the way.
Oh.
Face of a Cossack on it. Haven't smoked it in 2 years or so. Maybe I should get some tobacco for everything else.
Oh. Yeah, and then you don't have to light it on fire. You can just suck on it and get the taste of the tobacco without lighting it on fire.
Well, it's you got to get the tobacco buzz. That's the fun part. So.
Oh boy.
For me, at least. All right. Yeah. So what's next? We got a couple more, don't we?
Yeah. So can you explain the differences between the driving factors that Jefferson mentioned between the War of 1776 and 1800?
That's a good question.
He made a distinction between the driving factors for both wars.
Two revolutions. The one is obviously the one was the American Revolution, right? And of course it wasn't just limited to 1776, right? Went on for several years. What is it, 1781 or something like that, or thereafter. The first was a legitimate revolution when. I mean, Jefferson, when he talks about revolutions, he's careful to talk about the inciting of a revolution. When you realize there are injustices and you need to establish a revolution, you need to sustain the revolution once it gets going. And then once the revolution, if it's successful, you need to implement a new constitution in which the injustices against which you fought are changed, and you have a more just constitution, a juster constitution. So hit me with the question again. The
driving factors between the 1776 war and the War of 1800.
Well, the revolution of 1776, Jefferson thinks, is a legitimate revolution. We're fighting against the British. When we get to 1800, he's vice president prior to under your boy, John Adams. And Adams, according to Jefferson, and I think it's correct, takes the country in a different direction. He's taking it in a high federalist direction, which means we're going towards British methods of government. Alien Sedition Acts and so forth, the midnight appointment of judges, with the president behaving much like a king with unlimited powers. And Jefferson thought the country was going downhill. And when he ran for president in 1796, he says, and I believe him, that he really didn't want to be president. He preferred the vice presidency because it would offer him much more leisure to pursue his own things. And he thought Adams was deserving of the presidency. He's probably right. In 1800, after the abuses of the high Federalists of the Adams administration, Jefferson thinks he has no choice but to run for president. He's the right person at the right time. So he allows others to throw his hat into the ring. There was no campaigning or anything at the time. So Jefferson runs for president, and he is, remember in his first inaugural address, he says quite poignantly, at this point, the Federalists are all afraid that he's going to use his presidential powers to give them a colossal kick in the collective rear. But he doesn't. He says, we are all Federalists, we're all Republicans.
Right.
And that blows people away. It's my favorite writing that Jefferson, because it's sort of, would I have written that? I don't know. I have so
Did he actually write his inaugural address, or did he have a speechwriter?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Because like today, the presidents don't write their own.
No, they wrote their own stuff. But I mean, when Washington was writing his stuff, Madison oftentimes helped him. But Jefferson would write, and he certainly got feedback from members in his cabinet. But he was writing his own stuff. That's another reason why it was just so beautiful, because he's writing his own stuff. He's writing stuff from the heart. I can't imagine anybody else in his cabinet would come up with those sentiments. Let's not worry about, after everything the Federalists did, you'd think the Republicans would want to kick him in the rope.
Yeah.
You had no business appointing judges at the last minute. The Alien Acts, the Sedition Acts, the 4 acts we talked about there, and these things aren't right. So let's jumpstart things in the right direction by just kicking the Federalists in the rear. No, we're going to work together. And then he has these dinners, right? He starts dinners out at his house, right, in D.C. He's at what's called the White House now. He's having dinners for Republicans and Federalists, and he's paying for all this. Remember, we said last time, even though he's making $25,000 a year over 8 years, right? So he's making $200,000. By the time he leaves the presidency, he's minus $10,000. Partly because of spending and having dinners with lavish foods and fine wines. But he's trying to get people to come together. So at some one point, he'd have the Republicans only, then the Federalists only. But a lot of people think, well, that was sneaky because he's just trying to use underhanded ways to pass his own agenda. I don't think he was really trying to do that. I think he was trying to get intimate with the very people who are running the country with him, to hear what they had to say about what's going on, and so they could share information and work together. I could be wrong. I don't think so.
You're never wrong.
Well, I like for you to say that, but it's very likely not true. Just between us.
And I never lie. No, I'm joking. Okay, my last bit of curiosity was, what did Jefferson mean by the terms unchecked liberty and overchecked liberty?
Well, overchecked is like I said, it's a metaphor on my part, because you can check something.
Okay.
But the idea is that he talks in a letter to Madison, I think 1789, about 3 types of government. One is where you have perfect liberty in small societies. One is you have perfect tyranny. Perfect liberty would be like the small Indian societies, right? He says the problem with that is, in those small societies, you don't have any need for rules of justice per se, and they don't work for large communities because you need laws in large communities. So you can't just have perfect freedom in a large society, because everybody would go around doing whatever they want to do, and to be
Right.
Plato talks about that in books 8 and 9 of his Republic. In societies that are tyrannical, he's thinking about monarchies, maybe France at the time fits best. He says England's not too bad. What you have persons with tremendous power doing as they wish. That's not a good thing either, because you're not catering to the will of the people. So you have underchecked liberty, or too little liberty in tyrannies. You have too much liberty in Indian society or small societies. The idea is if you're going to live in a civil society, as John Stuart Mill will say later, you need to have just the right amount of liberty so that people are free to do as they want, but you also need to have the avenues of informed choices for them so they're not doing stupid things.
All right. Right.
We need people who are making choices that are contributing to the betterment of the government.
Mm-hmm.
And look what we're doing today with all the protesting and the violence and the racial riots we've had in the past. It's just it's too much liberty. It's just chaotic.
Right. And that leads people then to stop. I've even heard this out of people's mouths. Oh, maybe we have too much freedom. No, don't go there. Don't. Just because people are misusing their liberty.
It's not too much. Jefferson says too much freedom metaphorically, because the freedom, the word liberty for him means liberty to do as you want, but you will make choices that are virtuous.
Right.
Virtue for him is very important, and virtue is a constraining feature. The philosopher Kant says you always want to live in a way so that you're always, behaving virtuously,
right?
Which is in some sense not freedom. If Kant would say a certain maxim by which I ought to live, one of which, for example, never lie.
Mm-hmm.
If I adopt the maxim never lie, then in some sense I'm constraining my freedom. I'm not at liberty to lie anymore. Every time I speak in interface, I have to tell the truth. So there's a loss of freedom, one might say, in a weird sense. But in my sense, I think the Stoics and Kant would say, no, I found perfect freedom. I found the sort of perfect freedom that comes from an individual whose body, whose whole soul is in tune with truthfulness and virtue and goodness, and doing what is right. Christians have that sort of concept, living in the manner that Christ would say is the right way to live, being benevolent. And Jefferson bought into that. So his notion of liberty is robustly participatory. We need to participate in let's stop destroying our government. And if it has flaws, let's work to fix it. Mm-hmm. We don't need to take knees at the national anthem every 15 seconds. Right. We can stand up and say, yeah, our country's flawed, but let's fix it. Right. Let's demand that our politicians are representative of our needs instead of complain that they're not. Get them out of office.
Right. How did they get there? They got there one way, and if they're not
through us, they got there through us. And if you want to complain that the system is bad because it's corrupt and it's misinformative, well, we allow it to go on.
Right.
We can change it. We still can do that. So the answer to that one question you asked before we end, this is a very important topic in a very important book, because liberty entails responsibility. And if we don't behave in a Jeffersonian public with the right sense of responsibility, we're not free.
Right.
We're ravenous, we're chaotic, we're despotic, we're tyrants. And Plato says when a person is a perfect democrat, where everybody walks around doing whatever they want to do, the next step is tyranny. Someone sees the chaos and says, this is a perfect time to take control of the government, and we have a dictatorship.
And that's what's happening now.
Perhaps. I mean, Jefferson is still relevant, isn't he?
He is very. The more I get to know him, the more relevant he becomes in everyday life. It's
always
amazing.
That's philosophy, because it's universal.
Mm-hmm.
Universal claims are always philosophical. They're not political.
Timeless.
Timeless. They're not circumscribed by.
Jefferson is
time.
The timeless Jefferson.
This was a good one, wasn't it?
Yeah.